A billionaire walks into his glass tower for nothing more than another routine day of power meetings and million-dollar deals. But what he finds inside changes everything. The janitor pushing a mop across the marble lobby? He wasn't just some employee in gray coveralls. He was the boy who once stood by his side when no one else would. And now he was struggling to hold his own life together. What the CEO does next will leave you speechless. Stay with me until the end, because this story isn't just about wealth or success. It's about loyalty, gratitude, and never forgetting the people who believed in you when no one else did. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that like button and subscribe. Now let's move on to the story. Richard Hallberg, CEO of one of the fastest growing tech companies in the country, walked through the glass doors of Hallberg Tower with the kind of stride that made people step aside without even realizing it. The morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows, casting a glow over polished marble floors that gleamed like a monument to ambition. His world ran on precision. The assistants at his side rattled off schedules and deadlines, their voices blending into the steady rhythm of his morning. Tokyo investors are ready for the 10 o'clock call. Press wants a statement about the AI expansion. Confirm or hold. Lunch with the governor is at 1. Richard nodded without breaking stride. Every move he made radiated control. His custom suit, his polished shoes, even the calm set of his jaw. He was a man used to commanding every room he entered. The lobby itself reflected that same energy. Staff hurried to elevators, security scanned passes, receptionists guided visitors with brisk efficiency. A hum of order, urgency, and expectation filled the air. And then, his pace faltered. It was subtle, barely half a step, but enough that his lead assistant nearly bumped into him. Richard's eyes had caught something. Across the far side of the lobby, a janitor was working quietly. Gray coveralls, shoulders hunched but steady. He moved with the kind of patience only years of repetition could bring, pushing the mop in slow arcs, pausing to wring it out, then resuming again. There was nothing unusual about the scene. Janitors came and went every day. Most went unnoticed, invisible even, blending into the background of the empire Richard had built. But something about this one pulled Richard's gaze and refused to let go. The man straightened, stretching his back with a muted sigh before leaning against the mop handle. For the briefest moment, his face tilted into the sunlight pouring through the glass. And that was when Richard felt it. A flicker of recognition, a tightening in his chest. He told himself it was impossible, absurd even. But still, he slowed, his eyes narrowing as though the light itself might sharpen the image. The man's jawline, the slope of his shoulders, the quiet resilience in his stance. Each detail stirred something deep within Richard's memory, like a half-forgotten song rising to the surface. The assistant at his side cleared his throat softly. "Sir, the board is waiting upstairs." Richard didn't answer. Couldn't. His world had tilted, just slightly, but enough to disrupt the flawless rhythm of his morning. The janitor dipped the mop again, wrung it out with deliberate care, and resumed scrubbing. The movements were ordinary, mundane, the kind Richard had ignored 1,000 times before. But now each motion seemed magnified, significant. And then Richard saw it. A faint scar running just above the man's right brow. Small, almost invisible, unless you knew to look for it. But Richard knew. His breath caught. That scar. He remembered it vividly. A wound earned years ago on a cracked playground asphalt. Back when scraped knees and bruised fists settled arguments. Back when loyalty wasn't measured in contracts or balance sheets, but in courage and laughter. Memories surged unbidden. A boy standing in front of him, fists clenched against a circle of bullies. A fierce voice breaking through the jeers. "Don't worry, Richie, I've got you." Richard blinked hard, dragging himself back to the present. His hand tightened around the leather strap of his briefcase. "It can't be. Not here. Not like this." The janitor angled away, his face falling back into shadow. Richard's pulse hammered in his ears. His assistant, now impatient, touched his sleeve. Mr. Halberg, we're on a tight schedule. But Richard didn't hear him. He took a step forward, then another, drawn by something stronger than logic. His polished shoes echoed sharply across the marble. The janitor glanced up briefly at the sound. Their eyes met. It lasted only a second, barely enough for most people to notice. But for Richard, time stopped. Those eyes, tired, weathered, yet still carrying the same spark he remembered. Eyes that once saw him not as a future CEO, not as the master of a billion-dollar empire, but simply as a boy desperate to belong. The connection cut through decades in an instant. Richard's breath faltered. He didn't speak. Not yet. He couldn't. A part of him still doubted. A part of him screamed that this was coincidence, a cruel resemblance, a trick of memory. And yet, the truth pressed harder with every passing heartbeat. This wasn't just a janitor. This was Marcus Taylor, the boy who had once been his shield, his voice, his closest friend. Richard's world tilted further. The marble lobby, the assistants, the towering glass walls, all of it blurred at the edges. But Marcus didn't flinch. He lowered his gaze again, returned to his mop, as though the CEO of the entire company were nothing more than another pair of shoes crossing the floor. Richard stood frozen, his thoughts in chaos. Does he know me? Did he recognize me too? Or has life beaten him down so far he doesn't even want to? He swallowed hard, forcing air into his lungs. Sir, we're going to be late, his assistant's voice pressed again, strained now. But Richard barely heard him. Because deep down, he already knew the truth. The boy who once saved his future was now scrubbing floors in his billion-dollar tower. And nothing about this day would ever be the same again. The marble lobby faded in Richard's mind. The polished shoes, the towering glass walls, the nervous assistant at his side, gone. What replaced it was the rough pavement of a forgotten schoolyard. Hot Arizona sun beating down. A cracked asphalt playground where kids gathered in loose clusters. Some trading baseball cards, some tossing footballs, and others circling like vultures, ready to laugh at whoever the day's target might be. For young Richard Halberg, most days he was the target. He had been 12 then, lanky and awkward, his clothes always a little too neat for the neighborhood, his vocabulary a little too formal. His father was a small-time accountant who dreamed of climbing higher, his mother a quiet woman who urged him to keep his head down. But kids didn't care about dreams or quiet advice. They cared about weakness. And Richard had plenty of it. Hey, Richie, a boy sneered, shoving him against the chain-link fence. Where'd you get that shirt? Daddy's closet? Laughter erupted around him. Richard's throat tightened, his hands clutching the straps of his backpack. He wanted to vanish, to melt into the ground. The taunts came quick and sharp. Look at him, he talks like a teacher. Bet he cries to mommy every night. Richie the robot. And maybe he would have cried. Maybe he would have stayed that scared, shrinking boy forever. If not for Marcus Taylor. Marcus wasn't the biggest kid on the playground, not the strongest, but there was something in the way he carried himself. Broad shoulders, steady eyes, that made bullies hesitate. He lived in the same apartment block as Richard, just 2 floors below. His mother worked double shifts at the hospital. His father wasn't around much. But Marcus never complained, never whined. And he had this fierce loyalty to anyone he considered a friend, even if the rest of the world didn't. That afternoon, Marcus had been playing ball near the far end of the yard. He saw the group closing in on Richard, the shoves, the laughter, the fear on Richard's face. He dropped the ball without hesitation. Hey! His voice cut through the noise like thunder. The boys turned. Richard froze. Marcus strode forward, fists clenched, eyes burning. Back off, one of the bullies scoffed. Or what, Taylor? You gonna play hero? Marcus didn't flinch. He stepped in front of Richard, planting himself like a wall, his chin lifted, daring them to try. Yeah, he said evenly. I am. The circle wavered. Some muttered, others jeered half-heartedly. but none stepped closer. They all knew Marcus wasn't one to bluff. He'd fight, win or lose, and most of them weren't willing to risk it. After a tense moment, the pack dispersed, grumbling as they left. Richard stood there, trembling, his throat dry. Marcus glanced over his shoulder. "You okay?" Richard nodded quickly, though his voice cracked when he tried to speak. Yeah, I'm fine." "You don't look fine," Marcus said, softer now. He reached out, steadying Richard's shoulder. "Don't let them get to you, Richie. They don't know you like I do." Richard blinked, startled. Why'd you help me?" Marcus shrugged, as though it were the simplest thing in the world. "Because you're my friend." Those words stuck. For a boy who'd always felt like an outsider, who'd spent more time with books than with people, that single word, friend, meant everything. From that day on, things were different. The bullies tried again, sure, but every time Marcus was there, sometimes with words, sometimes with fists. He didn't win every fight, but he never backed down, and that made the difference. The scar above his right brow came from one of those fights, a wild swing from a bigger kid that caught him squarely. Blood had run down Marcus's face, but he didn't stop until Richard was safe. That scar was more than an injury. It was a symbol, proof of loyalty etched into his skin. But it wasn't just about defense. After school, Marcus would sit with Richard on the apartment steps, the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Richard would spread his books, explaining equations, diagrams, little pieces of knowledge he absorbed so easily. Marcus would listen, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just nodding along. "You're smart, Richie," Marcus said once, flipping through Richard's notes. "Smarter than anyone I know. You're gonna be somebody." Richard laughed nervously. "Yeah, right. I'm serious." Marcus nudged him with a grin. "One day you'll have people working for you. Big offices, fancy cars, the whole deal." Richard shook his head. "Not if I keep getting pushed around." "Then you let me handle that part," Marcus said. His grin softened into something steadier. "You just keep being you." And Richard believed him. For the first time in his young life, he believed he could be more than just a scared kid with a target on his back. Because Marcus believed in him first. The memory snapped back like elastic, pulling Richard into the present. The marble lobby shimmered back into view. Assistants, security, the faint smell of polished stone. But his eyes were still locked on the man with the mop. The scar, the same eyes, the same presence. Marcus Taylor. Richard's chest tightened, a mix of gratitude and disbelief flooding through him. The boy who once promised, "You just keep being you, I'll handle the rest," was now scrubbing his floors. And Richard couldn't begin to understand how the world had turned so cruel. Richard forced himself to move. The marble beneath his shoes gleamed as he strode toward the private elevators, assistants buzzing around him like anxious bees. The world expected him to be decisive, unshakable, a man who carried empires on his shoulders without blinking. But inside, it was rattled. The image of Marcus, the mop, the scar, the eyes that once stared down bullies, clung to him like a shadow. He stepped into the elevator. Doors slid shut. His reflection stared back from the polished steel. Perfectly knotted tie, silver cufflinks, the face of a billionaire. And yet, for the first time in years, he barely recognized himself. "Top floor," his assistant said quickly, pressing the button. "We're already 5 minutes behind." Richard gave a small nod, though he hadn't heard half of what the man had said. The doors opened to the executive level. Glass walls, panoramic views of the city. A table that seemed to stretch forever. Around it sat men and women in designer suits, each with their tablets glowing, each expecting Richard Hallberg to lead them with clarity and confidence. He walked in, and the room rose in unison. "Good morning, Mr. Hallberg." He acknowledged them with a curt nod, settling into the leather chair at the head of the table. Screens lit up with graphs, charts, quarterly reports. His COO began speaking, Numbers, percentages, projections. Words that usually lit Richard's mind like fireworks now fell flat. So because every time he tried to focus, another image intruded. A boy with steady eyes standing in front of him, fists clenched. A scar forming above a brow. A voice saying, "Don't worry, Richie, I've got you." He blinked hard, dragging his focus back to the screen. Our overseas expansion is showing a 22% increase in projections, the COO was saying. But if we don't lock down these partnerships, we risk losing ground to competitors. Sir, we'll need your final decision by— Excuse me, Richard interrupted. His own voice sounded distant to him, hollow. Dozens of eyes shifted to him. The COO faltered. Richard cleared his throat. Yes. Continue. But he hadn't heard a word. His mind was still in the lobby, still replaying that glance. What if Marcus hadn't recognized him? What if he had, but chose to look away? What if life had been so unkind that Marcus no longer wanted to remember a boy named Richie at all? He gripped his pen until his knuckles whitened. The COO kept droning on, but Richard barely registered it. Instead, he remembered nights on the apartment steps, books spread between them. Marcus asking questions, nodding patiently, even when he didn't understand half of what Richard explained. Richie, you're going to be somebody one day. I'm only somebody because of you, Richard had once whispered, and he had meant it. The irony cut deep now. Here he was, CEO of a billion-dollar tech company, his name stamped on skyscrapers, his voice able to sway investors worldwide, while Marcus, the boy who gave him courage, was scrubbing floors in silence. Mr. Halberg? Richard's head snapped up. The entire boardroom was staring at him. His COO's voice was tentative. We need your approval before we move forward. Richard realized he hadn't heard the proposal. Not a word. His jaw tightened. Send me the details. I'll review them later. The COO exchanged nervous glances with others. That wasn't how Richard Halberg usually ran things. Normally, his memory was razor sharp, his decisions swift. But today, the man who never hesitated was lost in thought. As the meeting stumbled forward, Richard leaned back in his chair, the city skyline stretching beyond the glass walls. The sun glared off steel towers, the world below bustling with lives he rarely thought about. And yet one life mattered now more than all the rest. Marcus. Why hadn't he said anything in the lobby? Why hadn't he stopped, spoken, reached out? Because fear whispered in the back of his mind. What if Marcus blamed him? What if Marcus looked at his tailored suit and billionaire smile and saw nothing but betrayal? What if the bond they once had been erased by years of struggle Richard couldn't even begin to imagine? The thought was unbearable. The meeting dragged to an end. Executives filed out, murmuring, leaving Richard alone in the vast glass room. He loosened his tie, exhaling sharply. For years, he'd told himself he owed his success to strategy, discipline, intelligence. But deep down, he knew. He knew there had been a moment, a scar on a brow, fists raised, loyalty unshaken, where everything could have gone differently. Without Marcus, he wouldn't be here. And Marcus was downstairs, invisible to the world that applauded Richard. Richard stood abruptly, pushing his chair back with a scrape. His assistant hurried in, startled. Sir, do you need the car? No, Richard said, his voice firmer now. I need to take care of something first. The assistant blinked. But your next call is in. Cancel it. The words came sharp, final. He walked past the assistant, through the corridor, into the elevator once more. The descent felt longer than the climb. His heart pounded in rhythm with the mechanical hum. And when the doors slid open again, Richard stepped back into the marble lobby. His eyes scanned the floor, the crowd, the suits, the polished perfection. And there he was. Marcus. Still mopping, still silent. Richard's breath hitched. For a man who could sway entire markets, he suddenly couldn't find a single word. But this time he wouldn't walk away. Richard's polished shoes clicked softly against the marble as he crossed the lobby, each step louder in his ears than the last. Around him, the tower buzzed with its usual rhythm, executives rushing, phones ringing, deals in motion. But to Richard, it all faded into background static. Only one figure mattered. Marcus, the man who once stood in front of bullies with fire in his eyes, was now pushing a mop in slow, deliberate strokes, head bowed, sweat darkening the collar of his coveralls. Richard's throat felt tight. How many times had he delivered keynote speeches to thousands without a tremor in his voice? How many times had he stared down billion-dollar negotiations with steady eyes? And yet here, in front of one man, words abandoned him. He stopped just a few feet away. Marcus didn't look up. He kept working, dipping the mop into the bucket, wringing it out, pressing it back against the marble. Marcus, Richard said finally, his voice low. The name hung in the air, heavier than he expected. The janitor paused. Slowly he lifted his gaze. Their eyes locked again. Tired eyes, older eyes, but still the same spark buried under layers of time and hardship. A flicker of recognition. Then it was gone. Yes, sir? Marcus's tone was polite, distant, the way an employee addressed a boss. Richard's chest tightened. It's me, he swallowed. Richard. Silence. The seconds stretched thin. Finally, Marcus blinked. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed just slightly, as though peering through years of fog. Richard Halberg, he said at last. Not a question, a statement. His voice carried no warmth, no surprise, only a quiet acknowledgement. Richard nodded quickly. Yes, Marcus, I can't believe it's really you, after all these years. Marcus leaned on the mop handle, his expression unreadable. Years, he echoed. Richard felt words bubbling, but none of them fit. He wanted to say thank you. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to erase the gray coveralls, hand Marcus a suit, sit him at the boardroom table where he belonged. Instead, all that came out was, "How have you been?" Marcus's lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "How do you think?" His eyes flicked briefly toward the mop, the bucket, the floor beneath them. Richard's breath caught. He had no answer. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. For the first time in decades, Richard Halberg, the man whose voice commanded boardrooms and investors, was speechless. Marcus broke the stillness. His voice was calm, steady. "You made it, Richie, just like I always knew you would." The old nickname, a whisper from the past. Richard felt something sharp lodge in his chest. Before he could respond, Marcus turned back to the mop, dipping it once more into the bucket, pressing it against the marble. Conversation over. But Richard couldn't move. He stood frozen, torn between guilt, gratitude, and desperation. Because in Marcus's simple words, he heard everything he had feared, and more. The sound of Marcus's words lingered long after he spoke them. "You made it, Richie, just like I always knew you would." And in that moment, Richard wasn't standing in the marble lobby of Halberg Tower anymore. He was 12 years old again. A skinny kid with hand-me-down sneakers, clutching a worn-out backpack on the cracked sidewalk of their neighborhood. The afternoon sun beat down on the asphalt. A group of boys, bigger, louder, had circled him, their voices sharp, mocking. "Hey, Richie, where'd you get those shoes? The trash? Look at his backpack. My grandma's purse looks newer than that." Laughter, cruel and unrelenting. Richard had tried to shrink into himself, clutching the straps of his bag tighter. He hated this part. Hated the way they sniffed out weakness, pounced on it like wolves. He could already feel the sting of tears behind his eyes. And then a voice cut through the laughter, strong, unshaken. "Back off!" The crowd turned. Marcus. He wasn't taller than the bullies, not stronger, but he stood with a fierceness that made him seem larger than all of them combined. His fists were clenched, his eyes steady. "You heard me," Marcus said, stepping forward. "Leave him alone." The ringleader sneered. "Or what?" And before anyone could blink, Marcus swung, his fist connected with the boy's jaw, sending him stumbling back. Gasps erupted. The balance of power shifted in an instant. The fight that followed wasn't clean. It wasn't fair. Marcus took hits, hard ones, but he never stepped back. Not once. He planted himself in front of Richard like a shield, every bruise and scrape screaming one truth. If you want him, you'll have to go through me first. By the time it was over, Marcus's lip was bleeding, his knuckles raw. But the bullies had scattered, muttering curses as they fled. Richard had stood frozen, his heart hammering. He couldn't believe it. Someone had fought for him. For him. "You okay, Richie?" Marcus asked, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Richard nodded quickly, voice trembling. Why did you do that?" Marcus shrugged, as though it were the simplest thing in the world. "Because you're my friend." Those 4 words had seared themselves into Richard's heart. From that day forward, they were inseparable. They studied together on the steps of Marcus's apartment building, sharing notebooks and dreams. Richard explained math problems. Marcus cracked jokes until Richard laughed so hard he forgot the bruises on his arms. On nights when the world felt too heavy, they'd sit side by side under the dim glow of a streetlight, whispering promises about the future. "Someday, Richie, you're going to be somebody big," Marcus would say. And Richard, with all the sincerity a boy could muster, would reply, "Not without you." Those were the nights Richard carried with him through the years. The nights that built him. The nights that made him. And now, standing in the lobby decades later, looking at the man with the mop, Richard's chest ached with the weight of memory. Because he knew the truth. He hadn't kept his promise. The memory faded, like smoke slipping through his fingers. Richard blinked hard, dragging himself back into the gleaming lobby of Halberg Tower. The past dissolved, but the ache it left behind remained sharp. And there he was, Marcus, still bent over the mop bucket, wringing out the rag with slow, practiced movements. It was almost cruel, the contrast. The boy who once stood like a warrior against a crowd of bullies was now scrubbing floors in silence. Richard cleared his throat. His voice felt foreign in his own chest. "Marcus, it's been too long." The janitor didn't look up. He pressed the mop head against the marble, sliding it in steady arcs. "It has," he said flatly. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't even know where to begin." "After all these years," Marcus cut him off quietly. "Most people just start with hello." The words landed like a slap. Richard exhaled, nodding. "You're right. Hello, Marcus." At that, Marcus finally looked up. His eyes, those same eyes Richard remembered from boyhood, were sharp now, searching. But they carried no smile, no warmth. "I never thought I'd see you here," Richard said softly. "Not like this." Marcus leaned on the mop handle, one hand tightening around it. "Neither did I." The silence that followed was thick. Around them, executives strode through the lobby. Assistants rushed with tablets and coffee cups, but no one noticed the quiet standoff unfolding near the far wall. Richard wanted to fill the silence, to pour out apologies, to rewind time, but his throat tightened with every word he tried to summon. Instead, Marcus broke it for him. "You've done well, Richie." His tone was even, unreadable. Better than anyone ever thought. Richard searched his face, desperate for a trace of the friend he remembered. "Not without you," he said quickly. The words tumbled out, shaky but true. "Marcus, you were the one who—" Marcus's hand lifted, cutting him off again. His expression hardened. "Stop." The single word froze Richard mid-sentence. Marcus's eyes darkened, his jaw set tight. "Don't say things you don't mean." Richard's heart lurched. For a man used to commanding the world, he suddenly felt 12 years old again, small, uncertain, stripped of power. "Marcus," he whispered, almost pleading now. "I do mean it." But Marcus only shook his head slowly, returning his gaze to the mop. dipping it into the bucket once more. And with that, he spoke words that hollowed Richard's chest. "You left, Richie. You made it out. You forgot the rest of us." The mop slid across the marble again, erasing the last trace of the conversation. Richard stood frozen, his world unraveling. Because Marcus wasn't wrong. Richard stood there, his briefcase heavy in his hand, but not nearly as heavy as the words pressing against his chest. Marcus's voice echoed in his ears. "You left. You forgot the rest of us." Executives swept past them, their eyes fixed on their phones, their minds on meetings and profit margins. Not one of them noticed the billionaire CEO standing frozen in front of a janitor. "Marcus," Richard began again, softer this time, his voice edged with something rare, uncertainty. "I didn't forget. I could never forget you." Marcus wrung out the mop with deliberate care, the water splashing into the bucket. He didn't look up. "Memory's a funny thing, Richie. You might carry people with you in here." He tapped his temple. "But if they can't see it, can't feel it, does it really matter?" Richard swallowed hard. "It matters to me." Marcus's laugh was short, humorless. "And what about when it mattered to me?" That question pierced deeper than any accusation. Richard had faced investors, rivals, entire boardrooms waiting to devour him. But he had never felt as exposed as he did now, under the weight of Marcus's gaze. "I was trying to survive," Richard said quickly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "You know what it was like back then. If I didn't get out, if I didn't push." Marcus's eyes snapped up, locking on him. "And you think you were the only one trying to survive?" The lobby seemed to go quiet around them, the distant hum of conversation fading beneath the force of that question. Richard's throat tightened. "I should have been there for you," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I should have come back." Marcus leaned heavier on the mop handle, his face unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, and Richard's words seemed to hang uselessly in the air. Finally, Marcus exhaled slowly. "You know what the difference is between you and me, Richie?" Richard's lips parted, but no sound came. Marcus's voice dropped lower, quieter, but sharper than steel. "When the world kicked me down, I stayed down here and kept fighting. You climbed out. You ran so far and so fast, you never looked back." The truth of it hit Richard like a blow. He wanted to argue, to insist Marcus was wrong, but the silence between them held his tongue. And then Marcus turned away, dipping the mop again, sliding it across the floor as if their entire exchange had been nothing more than background noise. For Richard, it was unbearable. The man who once stood in front of him like a shield was now turning his back. And for the first time in years, the billionaire CEO didn't feel powerful. He felt small. Richard's pulse thundered in his ears. He couldn't let Marcus slip back into silence. Not now, not after everything they'd both carried for so long. He took a step closer, his voice low but urgent. "Don't walk away from me, Marcus. Not this time." The janitor paused mid-swipe, his shoulders tensing. Slowly he turned, his eyes narrowing. "And what exactly do you want from me, Richie? An old friend's blessing? Forgiveness you never earned?" Richard shook his head, frustration breaking through. "I want the truth. I want to know what happened to you, why you're here, why you never reached out. You think I wouldn't have helped you? You think I wouldn't have been there if you asked?" Marcus's laugh was bitter, sharp. "Asked? You think I was supposed to go knocking on the doors of your fancy offices while you were flying around in private jets? Excuse me, Mr. Halberg, can your old friend borrow some scraps?" "That's not fair," Richard snapped, his voice cracking. "You were never a burden. You saved me. Don't you get that? Everything I built. I couldn't have done it without you." Marcus's jaw tightened. He slammed the mop back into the bucket, the water sloshing over the rim. "Then why didn't you come back?" The words echoed through the marble lobby, loud enough that a few passing employees glanced their way, slowing their stride. Richard froze. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Marcus took a step forward, his voice rising, years of silence breaking apart. Do you have any idea what it was like, Richie? Watching you rise while the rest of us stayed behind? The lights shut off, eviction notices on the door, my mom working 2 jobs just to keep us fed. And you? You were the golden boy, the one who escaped. Richard's chest tightened. Shame burned hot in his stomach. Marcus, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was that bad. You didn't want to know. Marcus's voice dropped to a cold whisper, but it cut deeper than the shouts. Because knowing would have meant coming back, and you were too busy climbing higher to look down. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard could feel the stares now, employees pretending not to eavesdrop but their eyes flickering toward the scene. He didn't care, not anymore. He reached out, desperate, his hand hovering just short of Marcus's arm. Please, just tell me what happened. Tell me everything. Don't shut me out. Not again. For a long moment, Marcus didn't move. His chest rose and fell, his grip tight on the mop handle, as though it were the only thing keeping him steady. Finally, his voice cracked, quiet but raw. What happened? Life happened, Richie, and it didn't wait for me the way it did for you. Richard's heart clenched. He wanted to say more, to close the distance between them. But before he could, Marcus dropped the mop into the bucket, the sound of the handle clattering like a final punctuation. Without another word, Marcus turned and walked toward the staff corridor, his figure swallowed by the shadows of the hallway. Richard stood rooted in place, his throat dry, his chest heavy. For the first time in decades, he had power over boardrooms, fortunes, governments even, but not over the one friendship that had built him. And now, he was terrified it was slipping away forever. Richard didn't think. He couldn't. The moment Marcus vanished into the staff corridor, his legs were already moving. Sir, your meeting! His assistant called after him, panic in his voice. But Richard didn't stop. He shoved open the door, the heavy metal frame swinging shut behind him with a hollow clang. The polished marble of the lobby vanished. In its place stretched a narrow hallway, dimly lit, lined with supply closets and flickering fluorescent lights. The hum of the building's machinery replaced the quiet elegance of glass and marble. The air smelled faintly of bleach and dust. Richard's shoes echoed against the bare concrete floor as he hurried down the hall, his eyes locked on the figure ahead. Marcus! The janitor didn't turn. His stride was quick, shoulders tight, every step fueled by anger he had held back for years. Marcus, wait! Richard's voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. Oh, finally, Marcus stopped. His back was rigid, his hand gripping the handle of a supply closet door. Slowly, he turned, his face shadowed, his eyes hard. What are you doing here, Richie? His voice was low but sharp as glass. This isn't your world. You don't belong in these halls. Richard's chest heaved, but he took a step closer. Then let me belong, for 5 minutes. Just long enough to hear you. Please. Marcus shook his head. Hear me? Now you want to listen? After 20 years? He let out a bitter laugh. I used to wonder if you even remembered me. Now I almost wish you didn't. The words hit like a blow, but Richard didn't flinch. I remembered every day, every time I faced someone who doubted me, I remembered the boy who stood up for me. The boy who said, I've got you. That never left me, Marcus. Never. Marcus's jaw tightened. His eyes burned, but not with nostalgia, with resentment. And yet here I am, cleaning up after your empire. Richard's throat tightened. Then tell me why. Tell me what happened. I can't change the past, but maybe I can change right now. Marcus's laugh was humorless, empty. Change right now? You think money fixes everything? You think throwing a few bills at me erases 20 years of silence? It's not about money. Richard's voice rose, echoing off the concrete. It's about you, about the only friend I ever had who saw me before the world did. Don't shut me out, Marcus. Don't make me lose you twice. Marcus's hand trembled on the door handle. He wanted to shut this down, to walk away and bury it again. But something in Richard's voice, raw, desperate, held him still. For the first time, Marcus let his guard slip. His voice wavered as he spoke, quiet but jagged. You want to know what happened, Richie? Fine. My dad left. My mom broke herself working double shifts until she collapsed. I dropped out to take care of her, but it wasn't enough. The bills piled up. The house went. The car went. And me? He gestured at his uniform. This is where I ended up, scrubbing floors in a building with your name on it. Richard's heart clenched. He reached out, his voice breaking. Marcus! But Marcus stepped back, shaking his head. Don't pity me. Don't you dare pity me. The corridor fell silent, except for the hum of the overhead lights. Richard's hand dropped to his side. He had no boardroom script for this, no billion-dollar answer. Only the raw truth in his chest. I don't pity you, he whispered. I owe you. Marcus's eyes flickered, something unspoken passing between them. A wall cracking, if only just a little. But before Richard could say more, Marcus pushed open the supply closet door and slipped inside, leaving Richard alone in the dim hallway. The sound of the door clicking shut, ringing louder than any closing bell on Wall Street. The supply closet door clicked shut. For a heartbeat, Richard stood frozen, the sound ringing in his ears like a verdict. Then he moved. In one sharp motion, he pushed the handle down and shoved the door open, the hinges groaning as it swung wide. Marcus spun around, eyes blazing. What the hell are you doing? Richard stepped inside, his breath tight, the sharp smell of cleaning chemicals filling his lungs. The room was cramped, shelves stacked with bleach bottles, rags, and paper towels. A single dim bulb buzzed overhead, throwing long shadows across the narrow space. Richard didn't care. He shut the door behind him, his voice low but unyielding. I'm not letting you walk away. Not again. Marcus gripped the edge of a shelf, his knuckles white. You don't belong here, Richie. This isn't your world. Then I'll stand in it until you make me leave. Richard's tone cut through the stale air. Because you're not just some janitor to me. You never were. And I won't stand by while you lock yourself away. Marcus's laugh was sharp, bitter. You think barging in here makes up for 20 years? You think a grand gesture erases the silence? No, Richard said firmly, stepping closer. It doesn't. But I won't let my silence be the last thing between us. You matter too much for that. Marcus's eyes narrowed. His voice rose, trembling with fury. Matter? Do you have any idea what it was like watching you climb higher while I sank lower? You with your suits, your towers, your name in the headlines. While I was pawning my mother's jewelry just to keep the lights on? Richard's stomach twisted. I didn't know. Marcus, I swear. You didn't want to know, Marcus roared, slamming his fist against the shelf. Bottles rattled, one tumbling to the floor with a dull thud. Because knowing would have meant facing the truth, that you left me behind. The words shattered the air between them. Richard flinched as though struck. Silence fell heavy in the cramped room. The bulb buzzed. Their breathing filled the space, ragged and uneven. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice raw. You're right. Marcus froze. Richard's shoulders sagged. I left. I let the distance grow. I told myself I'd come back when things settled. But things never settled. And all that time I carried your voice in my head, reminding me who I was. And still, I didn't reach out. His throat tightened, but he forced the words out. That's on me, Marcus. I failed you. Marcus's chest rose and fell. His anger still burned, but something else flickered in his eyes. Something wounded, fragile. You really think admitting that changes anything? He asked bitterly. No, Richard said softly, but maybe it's a start. For a long moment, Marcus didn't move. The fury in his posture held, but his grip on the shelf eased, just slightly. Richard took another step, the small room pressing them close. Don't shut me out. Don't let this be the end of us. Not when we've already lost so much. Marcus's gaze locked on him. torn between fury and the faintest trace of longing. The part of him that still remembered two boys on a cracked playground, fists clenched side by side. His voice dropped to a whisper, jagged and weary. You don't know how hard it is to forgive what feels like abandonment. Richard's chest tightened. Then don't forgive me yet. Just let me prove I'm still the friend you once had. The silence stretched again, thick with years of unspoken words. And though Marcus didn't answer, he didn't tell Richard to leave. For Richard, that was enough. For now. The air in the supply closet hung heavy, the silence pressing against both men like a weight. Marcus leaned against the shelf, shoulders heaving, his anger still raw but slowly giving way to something else. Weariness. Defeat. He dragged a hand down his face and muttered, almost to himself, You really want to know? Richard didn't hesitate. Yes. Marcus's eyes lifted, sharp. Careful what you ask for. Richard nodded. I can take it. Just don't hold it in anymore. For a moment, Marcus studied him, as though testing whether the man in front of him, the billionaire, the CEO, the untouchable figure in a tailored suit, was truly the same boy he once knew. Finally, Marcus exhaled and let the words spill. My dad walked out when I was 15. He began, his voice flat. Said he was going to the store. Never came back. Mom tried to hold everything together, but she was already working 2 jobs. By the time I hit 16, it was me paying the bills, me putting food on the table. School didn't matter anymore. I dropped out so she wouldn't break herself trying. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. Funny thing, I used to dream about scholarships, about college. Thought maybe I'd play ball or get into engineering. But dreams don't pay the power company, Richie. Richard swallowed hard, his chest aching. Marcus continued, his voice steadier now, like a dam broken wide. When Mom got sick, I picked up every job I could, stocking shelves, pumping gas, working night shifts. I slept in 2-hour stretches and still couldn't keep up. She passed before I turned 25. I couldn't even afford the funeral. Borrowed money from people I shouldn't have. Spent years digging out of that hole. His hands curled into fists. And through it all, you were out there, on magazine covers, on TV, in suits I couldn't even imagine buying. Everyone talking about Richard Halberg, the genius who built an empire. And me? His voice cracked. I was mopping floors in other people's towers, hoping no one from school would see me. Richard's throat tightened. Marcus. But Marcus pressed on, the words tumbling, faster now, heavy with years unsaid. Do you know what it feels like to carry your mother in your arms because she can't make it to bed? Do you know what it's like to choose between rent and medicine? To stand outside a grocery store counting quarters while people look at you like you're dirt? I watched my hands turn into calluses while yours signed contracts. I watched my back bend while yours straightened in boardrooms. And every time I thought, maybe he'll remember me. Maybe he'll reach out. His voice broke. But you didn't. The room fell quiet. Marcus's chest heaved, his eyes burning, his fists trembling at his sides. Richard stood frozen, every word carving into him. His success, once a source of pride, now felt like a mirror reflecting everything Marcus had lost. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have been there. I should have found you, even if you didn't want me to. I let my world get so loud I stopped listening for yours, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Marcus turned his face away, blinking hard. Regret doesn't change where I am. No, Richard said softly, but maybe it can change where we go. For the first time, Marcus's expression wavered, anger giving way to exhaustion, pain giving way to something unspoken. And for the first time since stepping into that lobby, Richard felt hope flicker in the shadows. The silence stretched long in the cramped closet, broken only by the hum of the flickering bulb. Marcus leaned back against the shelves, his shoulders slumped, his fury finally spent but leaving only exhaustion in its wake. Richard watched him, every instinct screaming that words weren't enough. He had money, power, influence, all of it meaningless unless he used it here, now. Slowly, Richard set his leather briefcase on the floor, his voice steady. Marcus, I can't erase the years. I can't take away what you've carried. But I can do something today. Marcus gave a humorless laugh. What? Write me a check? Buy me a new mop? Richard didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his eyes unwavering. No, I'm offering you a way back in. Not charity, not pity, a chance. Marcus's brow furrowed. Richard took a breath. You always had the sharpest mind I knew. You fixed things no one else could. Gadgets, bikes, even that busted radio we found in the alley. You've got more ingenuity in your hands than half the engineers I pay 6 figures to. And yet you're stuck mopping floors in my tower? No, that ends today. Marcus blinked, uncertain. What are you saying? Richard's voice dropped, firm and deliberate. I want you on my team, not as a janitor, as staff. I'll sponsor whatever training you need, set you up with a position in operations. You'll have benefits, stability, a future. You deserve that. Marcus's eyes widened, then narrowed with suspicion. Why? Why now? You feel guilty, so you're throwing me a bone? Richard's jaw tightened. Because you're my friend, because you believed in me when I had nothing, and because I should have believed in you too. This isn't guilt, Marcus. It's overdue recognition. Marcus's chest rose and fell, his fists loosening at his sides. He looked away, staring at the cracked linoleum floor. You don't understand, he muttered. I've been invisible so long, I don't even know how to be seen anymore. Richard stepped closer, his voice soft but unwavering. Then let me remind you. Let me put your name where it belongs. Next to mine, not beneath my feet. The words hung in the air, raw and unvarnished. For the first time, Marcus didn't answer right away. His silence wasn't rejection this time. It was thought. Hesitation. The wall he had built so carefully beginning, at last, to crack. Richard waited, his heart pounding. He knew this wasn't about money or positions. It was about trust, about proving that after decades of silence, he was ready to show up where it mattered most. Marcus stayed quiet for a long moment, the weight of Richard's words filling the little room. His hand tightened around the mop handle as if it grounded him in the only world he'd known for years. Finally, he let out a slow, uneven breath. You really think I can just step into your world? After everything? After decades of mopping up? After people like you? Richard didn't move. I don't think it. I know it. And you wouldn't be stepping into my world. You'd be stepping into yours. You deserve the chance to build it. Marcus's jaw worked, torn between pride and exhaustion. His voice was rough when it came. If I do this, it's not because I need a handout. I won't take pity money. I won't let you buy off your guilt. If I work for you, it's because I've earned it. Because I can prove I belong there. Richard's chest eased slightly, a flicker of relief in his eyes. He nodded firmly. Then prove it. Show me what you've always been capable of. I'll open the door, Marcus. Walking through it? That's on you. Marcus studied him, searching for even a hint of condescension. He found none, only steady determination, the same fire Richard once carried as a scrawny boy on a cracked playground, when Marcus had stood in front of him against a circle of bullies. Slowly, Marcus set the mop aside. The sound of wood clattering against the bucket was like a signal, a shift in the air. His shoulders straightened, his chin lifted. All right, Richie, he said at last, his voice steady despite the tremor underneath. I'll take your offer, but not as your charity case, not as your project. I'll take it as a man who's going to stand on his own 2 feet. You give me a chance, and I'll prove I was never meant to be invisible. Richard's throat tightened, but he forced himself to smile. That's all I want, Marcus, for the world to finally see the man I've always known you were. For the first time, Marcus allowed the faintest ghost of a smile to flicker across his face. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was something Richard hadn't seen in years. Hope. The flickering bulb buzzed overhead, the shadows of the cramped closet no longer feeling so suffocating. For both men, it felt like a door had opened, not just in Richard's gleaming tower, but in their lives. The mop lay abandoned in the bucket, a symbol of the life Marcus was leaving behind. For a long moment, the two men stood in silence, the flickering bulb buzzing above them. Then Richard extended his hand, not like a billionaire offering charity, but like a boy reaching out to his oldest friend. Marcus stared at it, his pride warred with years of bitterness, but finally he reached out and clasped it. The grip was firm, steady, and for the first time in decades, their hands locked as equals. Richard's voice was low. Let's not hide in closets anymore. Not you, not us. Marcus gave a small nod. Together they pushed open the door and stepped back into the gleaming corridor of Halberg Tower. The sound of activity washed over them, assistants moving briskly, analysts rushing with files, secretaries answering phones. But one by one, heads turned, conversations slowed, people noticed. The CEO of the company wasn't striding out of that room alone. He was walking shoulder to shoulder with a man in gray coveralls, a janitor whose shoes were still damp from mop water. An assistant, wide-eyed, stammered, "Mr. Halberg, the board." Richard raised a hand, silencing him with a calm authority. His voice carried across the lobby, clear and deliberate. "Everyone, listen to me." The hum of the tower dimmed, curiosity pulling every gaze toward them. Richard placed a hand lightly on Marcus's shoulder. "This man isn't just an employee. He isn't just a janitor. His name is Marcus Taylor. Years ago, when I was nothing, when I had no power, no fortune, no influence, he stood by me. He believed in me when no one else did, and I would not be standing here today if it weren't for him." The words rippled through the room like a shockwave. Assistants froze mid-step. A secretary lowered her phone. Even the security guard by the elevator straightened in disbelief. Marcus shifted uneasily, not used to being seen, let alone praised. He started to murmur, "Richie, you don't need to." But Richard cut him off gently, his voice stronger now. "No, Marcus, I do. For too long your story has been hidden in the shadows. Not anymore. You're part of this tower. You always should have been, and I'll make sure everyone here knows it." Silence held the lobby for a beat. Then whispers broke out, employees trading astonished glances. Some faces showed skepticism, others admiration. But all of them knew one thing. Their CEO had just declared loyalty to a man they had ignored for years. Marcus's throat tightened, emotions surging he could barely contain. Pride, fear, relief. A strange lightness, as if the weight of invisibility had finally begun to lift. He didn't speak, but his eyes, those same eyes Richard had recognized across the lobby hours earlier, held gratitude. Richard met his gaze, nodding once as if to say, "It's not just words this time. I'm standing with you." And for the first time since they were boys on a cracked playground, Marcus believed him. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Halberg Tower, casting streaks of gold across polished glass and steel. But for Marcus Taylor, it wasn't just another morning. He stood in front of the mirror inside a modest staff locker room, tugging at the crisp button-down shirt Richard's assistant had given him the night before. Gone were the gray coveralls. Gone was the mop. Instead, Marcus wore a clean white shirt, dark slacks, and a badge clipped neatly to his pocket. Operations Trainee Marcus Taylor. He stared at the reflection, hardly recognizing himself. His rough hands, scarred from years of labor, now rested on the edge of a desk, not a mop handle. For the first time in decades, he wasn't invisible. But visibility came with weight, with expectation. Taking a steadying breath, Marcus pushed open the locker room door and stepped into the operations floor. The shift was immediate. Dozens of eyes flicked toward him, analysts in sleek suits, coordinators juggling schedules, and tech specialists typing furiously at their stations, all pausing to glance at the man who, only yesterday, had been scrubbing their floors. Whispers followed him. That's the janitor, right? Why is he wearing a trainee badge? CEO's pet project, maybe? Marcus heard every word. His jaw clenched, but he kept walking. Richard's assistant, Amanda, intercepted him with a tight smile. Mr. Halberg asked me to help you get settled. You'll be shadowing the operations team today. They oversee logistics, maintenance schedules, supply tracking, basically the systems that keep this building and its staff running. Marcus nodded, grateful for her brisk professionalism. She handed him a tablet. Everything you need is here, but don't worry, you'll learn on the job. As Marcus moved to an empty desk, he caught the doubtful stares of two younger staffers nearby. One leaned toward the other and muttered, "This is a joke. He's going to break the system the first day." Marcus ignored it. He tapped the screen of the tablet, his brow furrowing as columns of data filled the display. Maintenance records, scheduling grids, supply orders. To someone unfamiliar, it was overwhelming. But to Marcus, it was familiar. He had lived this world in shadows for years, knowing which floors needed repairs before the report showed it, remembering when supplies ran low long before anyone logged it. He didn't just clean the building. He had kept it alive. Hours passed, and Marcus worked silently, absorbing the new tools, double-checking data, correcting small errors that others hadn't noticed. When Amanda returned around noon, she blinked in surprise at his screen. These logs, half of these discrepancies, took us weeks to spot. How did you? Marcus shrugged. You see enough broken systems, you start to notice patterns. This one was easy. Whispers spread again, but this time not with scorn, with curiosity. By late afternoon, a supervisor approached Richard in his top-floor office. "Sir, about Marcus Taylor. I don't know what you saw in him, but he's already flagged 3 issues in our operations database that we missed. He might actually—" The man hesitated, as if the words tasted strange. "He might actually be good." Richard only smiled faintly. "I told you, he was never just a janitor." Back on the operations floor, Marcus worked steadily, aware of the eyes still watching him. But the whispers had changed tone, less mocking, more cautious. He wasn't accepted yet. Respect would take more than one day. But for the first time in years, Marcus didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. And he intended to prove he belonged, not because Richard opened the door, but because he had walked through it with his own strength. It was Marcus's second week in his new role. By now, the whispers had dulled, but the stares lingered. To most employees, he was still the janitor trying to play office. That morning, the operations floor buzzed as usual, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, assistants juggling schedules. Marcus sat quietly at his desk, scanning maintenance reports. His fingers moved faster now, more confident with the tablet. Then it happened. A shrill alarm pierced the air. Red lights flashed on the monitors overhead. The hum of routine collapsed into chaos. "System breach," a young analyst shouted. "The main logistics server just went down." "Impossible," another cried. "We have redundancies." But the screens told the truth. Entire sections of the building's operations network were failing. Elevators froze between floors. Climate controls shut down in critical labs. Security doors locked at random, trapping employees in conference rooms. Voices rose in panic. "What's happening? Someone fix it. We can't even access the override panel." Marcus shot up from his chair, scanning the cascading error codes across the overhead monitors. His heart thudded in his chest, but not from fear, from recognition. He had seen this before, not in a boardroom, not on a tablet, but in the bowels of the building itself, when aging circuits misfired and backup lines overloaded. He had patched these systems with his own hands, long before anyone in this room even knew they existed. A supervisor barked orders. "Shut it down! Reboot the server cluster!" "No!" Marcus's voice cut across the floor before he realized it. Dozens of heads snapped toward him. He felt their skepticism like a weight, but he pushed on. "If you shut it down completely, You'll fry the backup grid. Half the building will stay offline for days. The supervisor narrowed his eyes. And you know this how? Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady. Because I've crawled through those circuits. I've seen the wiring with my own hands. That system isn't failing because of a breach. It's failing because the load balancers in sub-level 3 never got replaced, the supervisor scoffed. And what do you suggest we do? Mop the servers? Laughter rippled among a few staffers. But Marcus didn't flinch. He pointed at the monitors. Reroute power through the secondary grid in Section D. It'll isolate the bad circuits long enough to stabilize the mainframe. Then send a manual reset from the sub-level switchboard, not the software. Hardware first. That's the only way. The floor went silent. For a moment, no one moved. Then Amanda, Richard's sharp-eyed assistant, said firmly, "Do it. Follow his instructions." Technicians scrambled. Fingers flew across keyboards. A team rushed to the sub-level to flip the manual switches Marcus had described. Seconds dragged into minutes. The alarms wailed. Error codes screamed red. And then, one by one, the screens shifted. Red turned to yellow, yellow to green. Systems reactivated. Elevators jolted back into motion. Doors unlocked. The hum of the building returned, steady and strong. A cheer erupted across the floor. Employees clapped shoulders, relief flooding the room. The supervisor who had mocked Marcus turned toward him, stunned. How did you know that? Marcus's gaze was calm, steady. Because while you were watching from the monitors, I was the one keeping those circuits alive. The room went quiet again, but this time there was no laughter. Only respect and a dawning realization. Richard appeared in the doorway, having rushed down when the alarm started. His eyes swept the room, then landed on Marcus. A slow smile tugged at his lips. "Looks like the janitor just saved the tower," Richard said, his voice carrying pride. Marcus stood taller, not with arrogance, but with the quiet dignity of a man who had finally been seen for what he was worth. And in that moment, every person in the room understood. Marcus Taylor wasn't here because Richard Halberg gave him charity. He was here because he belonged. The crisis was over. Systems stabilized. The building hummed again, almost as if nothing had happened. But to everyone inside Halberg Tower, things had changed forever. Marcus Taylor wasn't invisible anymore. Later that evening, Richard invited Marcus into his corner office on the top floor. The view stretched endlessly across the city skyline, golden lights blinking against the dusk. For a moment, Marcus hesitated at the threshold. He had cleaned this very office more times than he could count. He had polished the glass desk, emptied the trash bins, dusted the picture frames, always unseen, always silent. Now he walked in as an equal. Richard gestured toward the leather chairs by the window. "Sit." Marcus obeyed, his posture still humble, though his eyes carried the quiet strength of a man who had finally been allowed to stand. Richard studied him. "Do you realize what you did today?" Marcus gave a small shrug. "I just did my job, same as I always have." "No." Richard leaned forward, his voice sharp but full of emotion. "You saved this building. You saved hundreds of people from a disaster, and you did it because you understood this company better than half the people working here." Silence hung for a beat. Then Marcus said softly, "I never wanted to be invisible. But life has a way of pushing you down until you stop trying to stand tall." Richard's throat tightened. Memories of a boy on a cracked playground, fists raised to protect him, rushed back. He spoke carefully, his voice weighted with sincerity. "You stood tall for me when we were kids. You believed in me when no one else did. And I forgot that debt. I won't forget it again." He reached across the desk, sliding a sleek folder toward Marcus. Inside was an offer letter. Operations manager. A permanent position. A future. Marcus's eyes widened. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the paper, but he didn't smile yet. "I'll take it," he said slowly, "on one condition." Richard raised a brow. "Name it." Marcus's gaze was firm. "Don't give me this because you feel guilty, or because we shared a childhood. Give me this because you believe I can do the job. Because I earned it. Richard's chest swelled. He stood, extending his hand. You did earn it, Marcus. Today you proved it to everyone. And to me most of all. Marcus rose, gripping Richard's hand. The two men stood there, framed against the glowing skyline, one in a tailored suit, the other in a plain shirt, yet finally equals. For the first time in decades, their friendship was whole again. The next weeks brought change. Employees who once whispered about Marcus now sought his guidance. His experience, once dismissed, became invaluable. He walked the halls with quiet authority, not as a janitor, not as a charity case, but as a man who had fought his way into the light. And Richard? He never stopped reminding his board, his staff, and himself of the lesson he had learned. That greatness isn't built alone. That behind every success story is someone who stood by you when no one else would. Marcus, standing at the top of the tower, looking out over the city, not as the man who scrubbed its floors, but as one who helped shape its future. Because in the end, this story wasn't just about money or power or even success. It was about loyalty, gratitude, and never forgetting the people who believed in you when no one else did.